Hello, you're listening to Two Old Choughs, a tale of two hospices. I'm Tamsin Thomas.
And I'm Gina Starnes.
And here we are again. But today we're talking about a subject which is important. To some people, there's a bit of a sigh when you mention it. To some people, wow, it's a moment for me to say what I care about. And that is writing wills. And I'm going to ask you a really personal question now, so you don't have to answer it. Have you written a will?
I have written a will, Tamsin. Have you?
Yes. Phew.
That's lucky then.
What prompted you to do it?
We were moving house at the time, actually, and had a bit of a life change and thought we needed to update our will. So I've always had a letter and expressions of interest, but we wanted to make it kind of formal. So both Chris and I did a will together. So it just felt really important at that time for me to be clear about what I wanted when I've gone. Because if not, I said I would come back and haunt Chris if he didn't do what I wanted.
Crikey.
Well, you know what I mean. But also, it's been really important for me with my parents when they died for me to know as executor what they wanted, and that was hugely helpful to both of us.
And for me, it was both parents dying, and both of them had the sense to write down what they wanted for their funerals. Yeah. The rest of it hadn't really dawned on me, but I knew they both had a faith that if we got it wrong, Mum certainly would probably come back and haunt us. And because they did that, it made life so easy for the family because we didn't have to get involved. We kind of handed the piece of paper over and said, that's what they want. That's what started me thinking, I need to write this down. And then, of course, you think, actually, while I'm writing what I want for my funeral, how about, I sort out the rest of it. Did you include personal wishes? Did you see it as a formal thing or as a more fun thing?
I've done both. So I've done a formal will. And I've also got an envelope that I keep with that will about what, kind of things that help me. Like you said, actually, when my parents died, actually, that I, would like this song or that song or where I want to be. Because those were the difficult things for me, wondering, I think, for parents. But also when you've done what they wanted, actually that's a lovely feeling. It certainly was for me to be able to know that you've carried out their wishes. And I would want somebody to do that for me because it's really hard at that time when you're having to think about all that, what would they want? Who does anybody else want? And people all have a view. And I think if you can go back to a letter or a document to say, well, actually, this is what Mum wanted and doesn't matter what anybody else says. I know I've done the right thing. And that was what's important for me.
I was just the same. In fact, I think I enjoyed the bit where I knew I didn't want the family to be going, oh, but I think Mum would have done this or whatever. And there are things like I have a Land Rover that I adore and I want to arrive in the Land Rover.
Wowzers.
But I've written it down because I know they'd have gone, we probably can't do that. No, you will find a way, please, doing absolutely. That. And the music and all that sort of thing. And also the little things that they might not know. I mean, one of the things I discovered recently was you can leave with a solicitor a digital picture to go on the front of your order of service or whatever they call it. I've chosen the picture because I know they'd choose a picture I'd be horrified by. So I've done all that and I've left it with the solicitor. Yeah. And when I told my grown-up children, they were, really? You can do that? And I said, no, absolutely. It's all, can we see it? I said, no. It could be a piece, it'll make you laugh when you see it, at a time when you'll probably need to laugh. Well, we're talking about wills as if we know what we're doing, and maybe we don't particularly. The reason we're talking about it today is it is actually a really important thing to do. No matter what, at some stage you must get round to it. And the great thing is that here at Cornwall Hospice Care, we're surrounded by experts and we've got one in the room with us. And I'm delighted to introduce Teresa Blenard from Walters Barbary Solicitors, who we work with, don't we? You come in sometimes.
Yes, so I come into both of the hospices and see patients that are in here or family of patients that are in here, talk to them about what needs to go in a will, what kind of assets they might not have thought about, and what happens if they don't have a will, really, just so they can see both sides of. A lot of people kind of think that they know what would happen if they don't have a will. So I talk to them about what should go in a will and what doesn't have to go in a will, and then sort of leave them to think about it. But for most of the time, the actual discussion about it is what really helps them. And the discussion about, as you've just said, what do they want? And they have that discussion in front of the family members, where the family members otherwise wouldn't know, and where they just maybe haven't thought about asking, especially if they're in here because it's end of life, or if they're in here because they've been ill for a long time. Nobody wants to say, what do you want to happen after you've died? Because everybody wants to hope they've got a few more months, a few more weeks. They don't want to start the discussion. And actually, starting that discussion of what will we do in the presence of somebody is really helpful for them, because they don't want to ask outright, even if they know what questions to ask. And as you say, you don't want to sort of be left with, what would mum have wanted? So the most helpful thing is, let's just have that discussion with your family. We'll also have a discussion without your family here, in case you don't want them to know what you're doing, but have the discussion with your family of what's important to you, what nobody else would necessarily know if you went into a solicitor that your Land Rover was important. So it's really important to have the discussion of what's important to you. It's supposed to be a really personal document of your wishes, what's important to you and who is important to you. And I think people forget how much personality they can put in their wills and how individual they can make it.
That's very much like our work here, isn't it? That what matters to you. Sorry, that's something that is a bit of a mantra, isn't it, to us in all ways.
And I think it kind of goes back to a lot of our podcasts and our discussions that we've had, and the discussions that we have on the wards. It's actually that it's those conversations that are so important. And I guess you're taking it, Teresa, to the next stage where you're getting people to write it down. But actually, if you talk to people about those difficult conversations, sometimes actually talking about it just makes it easier then to move on. It's so much easier than the unsaid or the wondering that's around for people, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the going around and around in their head of what do I do? And most people that don't have a will, the reason they don't have a will is because it's all going around in their head and they don't know what to do with it, and they don't know where to put it, and they kind of think that they need to turn up at solicitors with, this is what I want, this is who I want to have it, sign on the dotted line and go away. And because they can't decide that, they don't do anything. Whereas actually what they need to do is have a discussion with us, give them all the options, have a discussion with their family to discuss all of those options, and then see a draft, see what it looks like, think, now that I've written it down, that isn't right, go back and try again, do something else until they are happy with it. But they need to start having the discussions, because otherwise it's 3 a.m, or when you're on an icy road, or when you suddenly find out about a friend, you just think, oh my goodness, I still haven't done it, and I'm not quite sure what to do about.
I think you're right. I think people also, they don't realise that you can have time to think about it and change it, and it is a kind of a living document, isn't it? Your life changes, your big events happen, little events happen, family dynamics change, and actually what might have been right 5-10 years ago isn't necessarily right now either. And
so we normally say to people, look at it, get it out. We send you a copy at home. We really try and make it so that you understand it. We've got a little bit of legal jargon in, but we very much try and make it so that you understand it and it doesn't have anything unnecessary, because you need to sit at home with a cup of tea. We say sort of every 5 years, get it out and just say, is that still right? Do I still know those people that I've just appointed to be in charge? Is my son still married to that person that I've given something to? Maybe update it every 10 years, maybe you don't need to, but at least look at it and just check. Actually, I had my parents as executors. They're now in their 90s because I haven't changed it for 30 years. Maybe I should put my children on because they're in their 40s and are perfectly capable of dealing with it now. So it can change over time. Although you make it to last forever and you try and take into account what happens in this scenario, what if that person's died, what if that's happened. You make it to cover that, but then you change it when those events have happened, to update it with the next. What happens? What happens if people die in the wrong order?
Yeah.
And I think this is a really key question, because I'm not sure I understand. What happens if you don't write a will?
Well, so it depends. So there are very strict intestacy rules in England where...
Sorry, intestacy.
Intestacy, which means if you don't have a will. If you don't have a will, you are intestate. And so there's a set of rules of who inherits. So I've got a few guesses for you of examples of, if you don't have a will, who do you assume would inherit? Because everybody thinks who they consider their next of kin is the person that would inherit. And that's one of the things. People think, I don't need a will because my next of kin will inherit. And they think that the next of kin you've chosen with the hospital, the person you've put down, is your next of kin and will inherit. But it isn't. There's a very strict set of rules. So I'm going to let you have some guesses. You're married and you've got children and you die. Who do you think would inherit?
Your husband.
Your husband inherits some of it, and your children inherit some of it, depending on the level. But if you've got children from a previous marriage, then actually you end up in a situation where your husband inherits some of your house and your children from your first marriage end up some married, some of the house. Depending on the value of the assets, he gets a certain fixed amount, and above that, everything is split between your kids and him, which is fine if everybody gets on well, and not fine if it's a second marriage or you don't talk to your children. If you've got 3 children, but one of them you haven't spoken to since they left with their dad at 4, that one also gets a share of the property. Okay, next one. This one is a ridiculous one, and I don't know why it's still law, but it really is. You are not married, you don't have kids, but you've got several brothers and sisters. Your mum remarried when you were 6, and so you've got some from her first husband and some brothers and sisters from her second husband, and you die without a will. Who would you imagine would inherit?
To be your mum?
If your mum's already died,
Okay,
so you've only
okay.
got your brothers and sisters.
So it would be your brothers and sisters?
Yeah, but only the ones that share the same dad and mum as you. Or the ones that are half siblings, that only share your mum and have got the new dad, don't inherit anything. They don't get a half, they don't get anything. Only the ones that are biologically both, not half, inherit. Which is ridiculous. In this sort of blended family sort of day and age, so full blood is counted as a higher level than half siblings. And so even if they've lived with you, with your mum since they were born, they don't get anything, which is ridiculous. You've married a widower when you were in your 20s and he had 2 little kids. You've brought them up, you're now in your 80s, they're in their 60s. Your husband died a long time ago, but your children that you've brought up since you were 2, not technically yours, but you've brought them up for 60 years, they are not in any way related to you because they're not your blood. So if your husband dies first, it will go to your third cousin who lives in Southampton that you've never met, not to children that you've raised for 60 years because they're not related to you. And I think people kind of forget that. They kind of think, well, my niece comes to visit me at the hospice every day. She's down as my next of kin. She's got power of attorney for me. She does all my appointments for me. That's lovely. But actually, you've got 7 nephews and nieces. They all are equal next of kin, not just the one that's close to you. So it gets split between everybody.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think people just...
You're winning the argument for a will here, quite substantially.
Yeah. The other thing that people don't realise about that is you've been living together for 10 years, you've got kids together, but you're not married. If you're not married, you are not next of kin. You are not in any way legally connected to that person. So you will not inherit anything if you're not married.
Wow.
Yeah. Doesn't matter how long you've been together for. Doesn't matter if you change your name by default, anything like that. If you're not married, you don't inherit anything unless you've got a will.
And I heard, please tell me if this is a myth, because we like busting myths, that sometimes if you die without a will, the Duchy of Cornwall can get a bit.
Yes, so if there is no one to inherit because you have no family, it goes to the Duchy of Cornwall.
That seems so a sort of 16th century, doesn't it?
Because there's a list, and it is husband, children, parents, brothers and sisters, aunties and uncles, the Duchy.
Now, I knew that because I had a surprise phone call from somebody who was investigating somebody who had died without a will. And it was a claim, and they were from the Duchy. So we've had that experience recently. I've had that.
Yeah.
And I had no idea.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is absolutely ridiculous,
Yes.
isn't it?
No, it really does feel like it's from another era almost. And then what happens if you die without a will and you don't have family? Do you get buried, I don't know, by the council or?
So that is very dependent on if you've got money. As long as you've got money, you can be buried by anybody. So when you fill out a death certificate and things, one of the things it says is why you're doing it. And one of them is causing the body to be buried. So we could apply and say, this person's died, there's no will, but they've got money. You've got to get access to the money first sometimes to be able to do it. But you can go and instruct as long as you've got authority to use their money, which is sort of where the problem comes in, really. If they've already done a funeral plan, so they know what they want, as solicitors we can process it, but actually having the authority to get any of the money needs somebody to apply for a grant of probate, and that needs somebody to be entitled. You can do it if you're a creditor. The funeral director can do it. We could probably do it on behalf of the funeral director, but most of the time it's going to be the Duchy if there's nobody else. But yeah, as long as you've got money, somebody will find a way to access your money to pay for a funeral. Really,
Good.
Because otherwise the council's got to do it.
Yeah.
As you say.
But the upshot is, write a will.
Write a will.
Right.
Write a will, and remember to check it, because it gets revoked for things that you don't realise. Like if you can't find it anywhere, nobody knows if it exists. If you get married, it gets revoked immediately when you get married. Because when you get married, your next of kin changes. So your next of kin goes from being your mum and dad, or your children if you've got children, to being your husband. And so historically, the assumption is if your next of kin changes, your will must have been written without taking them into account. So it gets immediately revoked. You might have been together for 20 years, decide to be really romantic and get married. You've got a will, it's all tied up and sorted. It's not relevant. All you've got to do is re-sign it again afterwards, but you go straight back to intestacy again.
And that's really useful for us to remember here at the hospice, because we often get people who've been together for a long time, and they will want to get married because actually that feels like the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
But then I guess it's not always followed up with the paperwork with regards to wills and things.
Why would you know that getting married would revoke your will? It seems such a ridiculous thing. And again, I think that is because your next of kin changes. And because of that, the assumption is whatever you put in your will can't be right anymore, because you would want it to go to your husband. So the will is no longer relevant. Intestacy comes in, which gives the majority of things to your husband, whereas otherwise your will that you wrote 30 years ago would give everything to brothers and sisters and things like that. So it sort of makes sense, but at the same time, people don't know about it.
So I guess you also need to revisit your will if your husband or wife were to die.
It's good to revisit it. We try to make sure that our wills always say what happens after the second one of you dies, because the last thing you want to do when you're grieving is think about what do we do now. So people do often come in and change it, but the answer is normally you don't have to change it. We've taken that into account. Give it some time, and then think about it. But yes, people do, and that comes up with a different problem with will writing of husband dies, wife makes a new will, wife changes the will to leave assets to only her kids, not his kids, if it's a blended family and things, because you can always change the will afterwards. Yeah.
You're listening to Two Old Choughs, a tale of two hospices. I'm Tamsin Thomas.
And I'm Gina Starnes.
We just do that in the middle to have a break. Sorry, I should have explained beforehand. I find the whole subject of wills quite scary, because as soon as things get technical, like when you're trying to understand a pension, I have a creative brain. It goes, well, I'm not dealing with that. So I chose to go to a solicitor because I knew I needed to have a will. But I see that there are DIY packs, write your own will, keep it in a drawer type thing. Are they safe?
Absolutely, as long as it's simple. DIY pack is normally better than not having a will, but sometimes it's worse than not having a will, depending on if you've done it right. So the worst thing about a DIY pack is people forget residue. So they will say, I want this bank account to go to this son, I want this to go to this son, I want my golf clubs to go here, I want my tools to go there, and then they sign it. And they don't put in, I want my residue to go to. And so anything that isn't the things they've specifically mentioned goes into intestacy. So you're right back to the same problem again. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the wills that you can get, because it says on it, who are your executors, what possessions do you want to leave, what do you want the residue. So if you fill it in properly, it's absolutely fine. It's just if there's no one to make sure you filled it in properly and to ask the questions, it doesn't prompt the right discussions. So if you've had a will, you've had all of those discussions, you decide to make a change, or you decide to do something entirely different, or your friend then wants to do a will and look at yours but do it themselves for cheap, they're fine. They work, they're legal, there's nothing wrong with them. You just need to know what you're putting into it, and you need to have all of those discussions that were around it of what it means. Stepchildren are not classed as children. You have to name them. So if you say, I give everything to my son and I give 5,000 each to my grandchildren, step-grandchildren aren't grandchildren. So as long as you know that and you write grandchildren and step-grandchildren, or you name them all, it's fine. But sometimes it doesn't follow your intentions just because you haven't had someone there going, you do realise they're not actually classed as that. You do realise that isn't what that means.
We're joined today by Teresa Blenard from Walters Barbary Solicitors, and we're talking about how important it is to write a will. So one of the blockers I see for people might be, but if we go to a solicitor, that means a cost.
Yes.
Is there a big cost? Is it a costly thing? Can you do it on the cheap?
So there are lots of different ways to do it, I suppose. Most solicitors now have a fixed fee for a will, so you can phone up, and there's a rule that you have to on your website have what your costs are, so people can check the website beforehand and see. If you start to include trusts, it can get more expensive, and if you change your will every single year, it can get more expensive. But generally, the cost of the will is a fixed price that is on the website. You can look at it so you can know going forward what it is. If you do not have any money at all and you still want to do it, there are several like charity will weeks. So obviously we do some with the hospice where we come here and do wills, but they also have like Cornwall Air Ambulance will do one, and Cornwall Wildlife Trust will do them, and so they have others where you can leave a gift in your will instead of paying us, and then we donate our time for charity, or the charities pay us a little bit of money to write the wills. So there's always a way around it like that if people don't have anything where they can give after their death instead of paying. But otherwise I'm trying to think what it's less than the price of. It's probably, it's less than the price of a weekend at a hotel to do a will. So it sort of depends on your priorities, really.
And does it complicate it if you want to leave a gift to a charity or more than one charity?
No, not at all. Most people, so the kind of questions that we ask when people come in, because we try to make it, what do you want? So we start off with, let's have a discussion. What is it that you want? What is important to you? What's important to you during your life in terms of people, what you like to do, all of that sort of thing, and then we will write it in. So often people will have a legacy to one or two different charities. They will have a legacy to children that have been important in their life, whether they're their own or not, maybe next door neighbours that have been very close to them. They'll put in personal possessions, and then they'll have residue. And residue is everything else, just everything else really. So if you don't quite know what all your investments are, and you don't quite know what all your pensions do, and you don't really understand all of the and you don't even know what you're going to have, you don't need to know exactly what you're going to have. You can say, I will give this amount of money to this charity, this possession to this friend, everything else that is left, which is residue. Residue is just everything else, to my 3 sisters. So you don't have to list everything. So it can be very straightforward. It can be a page. It can be 10 pages. Little old ladies like to write very long things because they know much more what they've got left. They know that's the money in my premium bonds. I'm not going to spend it. I'm dividing it between everybody in my church, and it is a list of £250 per person.
But also, I know when I was writing my will, the solicitor said to me, if you're leaving a gift to a charity, write a paragraph. Let that charity know why. Mm-hmm. Because quite often charities receive legacies and they've got no idea what triggered it. And so I wrote about why I'd left this particular charity a gift in my will. It made me feel good to put it in writing, actually, and to think that at some stage, someone who doesn't know me will read what triggered me to do that. And I've tried to tell as many people since then, if you're leaving something to a charity, tell them why.
Absolutely. To a charity and to people, to anybody, because you want to make it personal. Somebody is going to read this at the point in their life when they're sad they've just lost you. And so for the charity, it's always lovely to know why. And it's always lovely if it says, in memory of the help that you gave my husband, or because you took care of my mum so well. Because actually, you all do so much, and as much as everybody says you're amazing, actually hearing specifically about someone whose life you've changed or you've made something happening easier, people really like to hear. And I think the same family members do, or nieces, or a friend that you haven't spoken to for 30 years. If you're leaving them £500 to go and buy that hat that we always talked about, things like that, it just makes it more personal again, which I think is always really good.
I'm chaotic in the way I dress. I'm going to give you a little personal story now. And my mother was a very smart woman, and she just despaired of me at all times. She hated the fact I used to wear a dark lipstick. She said it made it look like I was going to have a heart attack. So when she died, she left me a pair of brand new court shoes and a lipstick in the colour she felt was suitable. And she said, if you only ever wear this for weddings and funerals, I'll know you look semi-smart. And she left it with the solicitor.
And do you wear them?
I wore them till they literally fell off my feet. And now sometimes I will say to someone who I think knows what they're doing, is my lipstick all right? but that was, she put that in the will. The solicitor thoroughly enjoyed that bit. Absolutely. Oh, by the way, I've got a box for you. And there were the shoes. So for charity then, it's a fairly straightforward job.
It's incredibly straightforward. It is just literally a line. So it will just say, clause 5, I leave £500 for hospice care. 5A, I leave £500 to... it's literally like that. It is a list, really. You can have a big paragraph of why, and you can leave things to a charity for a particular purpose if you wanted to. So you could leave to Cornwall's Hospice Care with the request that they spend it, and then you can put some more detail of what. We try not to ever do anything that would be binding, because the purpose is to be helpful, not hindering. But often people will kind of say what they'd like it for, sort of I leave money to Cornwall Hospice Care to have a bench with my mum's name put on it, or to buy some new fairy lights for their whatever that beautiful thing over there.
Treehouse.
Treehouse, yeah.
And
so you can be specific about what you'd like it to do. You can be very general.
And in fact, I was staggered to find out that 2 in every 5 of our patients, so 2 in every 5, are cared for thanks to the gifts people leave in their wills to Cornwall Hospice Care.
It's hugely important to us.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And people like leaving money to Cornwall Hospice Care because everybody knows someone whose life has been made more comfortable by coming, who came stressed and went away calm, or who came worried and the worry just went from them. So whenever I come and do wills here, all of the family always say, how amazing it is, how they're going to leave money, all of that sort of thing. So I think anyone who has in any way been involved in it realise how much it's run on donations and how important it is.
And of course, they're guarding our future.
Absolutely.
If legacies play that big a part in how we fund our charity, they really are making sure that we're still going to be here.
Yeah, and a lot of people have started realising, sort of with split families and all of that sort of thing, that you get to the stage where it's being divided between 13 nephews and nieces that don't need it. And actually, they realise, I'm going to give half of my estate to my favourite niece and the other half to Cornwall Hospice Care and things like that, because people don't see their family, not their sons and daughters or their brothers and sisters, but when they get older and those ones have died, and they realise that actually people are split so much up country and things like that nowadays, and people tend to not have that family home where it's the family home, no one's going to sell it because my daughter's going to live it and then her daughter's going to live in it. That actually, if it's going to be sold, there's suddenly a lump of money that they never had that they can choose what to do with. And often that's where a larger percentage goes to the charities, because they realise, actually, I've only ever had my pension, I'm suddenly going to have £100,000 and I get to choose what happens to it. It's not going to be my children's choice when I die and give it to them. I can choose now. They can have 50,000 each to go and get a deposit on their own house, but also I can choose to do something I would have liked to do in my lifetime.
So let's get down to brass tacks now.
Right.
Is there a value tax-wise in doing all of this?
So the real benefit tax-wise of looking at it is using up all of your allowances and knowing what's available. So when you give any money to a charity, it's tax-free. If you give more than 10% of your estate to your charity, you get a 10% reduction in the rest of the tax that you pay. So it makes the rest of your estate cheaper, so you pay less tax. So overall, you pay less tax if you give some to charity, which is great. And then just in writing a will, generally, people don't realise how many other exemptions are available. And several people that come in not married and go away married, because they don't realise this is what your tax allowance is right now. If you get married, this is what your tax allowance will be. And it's significantly more. And then I kind of go, this is the tax that you will save if you get married. I don't want you to get married for unromantic reasons. But see that figure there? That's how much tax you will save if you get married. And then they get married. And then when they've got married and they phone me up and they say, we've got married, I say, great, now come in and re-sign it because it's invalid now.
Yeah.
And that's often is my my wedding present to them, is just come in and we'll just redate it and re-sign it, and I won't charge you, and then we'll put it back again, because all you need to do is date it afterwards. But it makes a big difference. But when they're looking at all of those things, anything they give to charity is tax-free. So when they're looking at there being a tax burden and how they can reduce it, giving some to charity can play a big part of that. If they've got sort of assets that they're going to think about giving anyway, as long as you give it to a proper named charity, it can make a big difference.
So, I mean, there's so many questions, isn't there? We could sit here for 2 hours, really. If people want to find out more, do a bit of homework, and I'm thinking, no, see, I just went to the solicitor. My husband is a man who does lots of homework first. Where do you go? Where do you start to find out more about wills?
Good question.
And where's safe to go?
So somewhere that you've heard of. So Martin Lewis, a lot of people come in and say, saw a Martin Lewis podcast, he said this. Like, great, lovely, very sensible man. Everything he says is normally valid. Age UK will have a lot of things about it. The government website have a lot of things about it. There isn't too much on the websites that are rubbish. Sometimes you can look on Google for things and find a ridiculous amount of information that's wrong.
Exactly, that's what scares me.
As you are only looking at UK law, it's not an interesting enough topic for people to write rubbish about, I think, really. Don't look on Mumsnet and Petrolheads and things like that. Don't look on people forums because they're just telling you their experience. But as long as you look on a website that's been written by a professional of any type, there will be some guidance, really. The government website is very good for anything about intestacy rules and inheritance tax, anything like that. Obviously, solicitors' websites, our website will say what a will is, why you should have one, things like that. But Age UK and things like that tend to have quite a lot about it as well. And Alzheimer's and those sorts of things.
And on our website, we've got a page and information about it as well. So you can go to us as a charity or any other charity,
and they will tell you all about it. Yeah,
it is so fascinating, isn't it? And I always want to ask, what's the most bizarre thing you've ever been asked to put in a will, or are you not allowed to say?
It might be shoes in a box, actually. Tamsin.
And lipstick.
And I will take out the details to make it nice and anonymous. But I had somebody make me write in a will, and luckily we never got to the signing stage because they didn't know how I was going to enforce this. She's only allowed to inherit if she stays out of bed for at least 10 hours a day.
Fantastic.
Which is amazing, isn't it? So clearly she had like an 18-year-old and she thought, if I give her loads of money,
she'll get up.
She's not going to go to college. And so she was only allowed to inherit if she got up and left the house and did things and made use of her life, which is fine, but you can't put that in a line. That has got to be a trust. As soon as it is conditional on anything, it's a trust. You either give a gift, absolutely, it's yours, do what you like with, or you give it so that it can come back. And if it can come back, it's conditional, it's in a trust. Someone's got to look after that and manage it, keep an eye on it, and have responsibility for, am I doing the right thing? And then that's a whole extra page.
Yes.
And then somebody being responsible for that for how many years? How many years does that run for? Is it until she's 20, 30, 40? That's the most ridiculous I've had, I think.
Well, I think it's a fascinating subject. It's a scary subject, which is why I think it's good that we've been able to talk about it. But I also, Gina, think, it's a really important subject, especially if you want your own wishes to be in there.
I think it is, and I'm going to go home and check mine. I think actually I might do that with a glass of sherry for Christmas, and just have a bit of a rethink, because it just does make you think, doesn't it? Really.
Would you like me to tell you the top reasons why people don't make a will?
That would be really helpful, because then they can address that, can't they? Yeah.
So the top reasons people don't make. I didn't have a will for a very long time, and I will tell you why. Because I'm married, and I knew that if I left a will giving everything to my husband, he would remarry, have more kids, and then share everything that we had with his new wife and kids, because he would just sort of, have a new family and things. So I wanted his will to give everything to me, but I didn't want my will to give everything to him. And I could never get
How honest for you, well done.
So I didn't write a will for a very long time, because I was going to write his will, so I couldn't write his will different to mine, and I didn't want to give everything to him. And I knew under intestacy, he'd get some and the kids would get some. That's why I left it, and I didn't do anything. But most of the reason why people don't do wills is because they can't decide. So things like, in a will, you can appoint who is going to be the legal guardian for your children. So if you and your husband die, instead of the court deciding who looks after your children, you can appoint someone to have parental responsibility. But that provokes is it my brother and sister, or is it your brother and sister? Is it my parents? Is it your parents? Let's wait until they're 18 and it doesn't matter, and then do a will. So people don't do it. They don't do a will because they are worried that if one of the children find out what they've written, they'll complain, and they would like to leave some things to one child and not to the other child, and they have children that they know are going to argue, they don't want to talk about it, and because they don't want to talk about it, they just leave it. And they just leave it and leave it and leave it because they think it's going to provoke argument. And so we say, like, have the discussion now. It's a hard discussion, but your mum, if you say to your 3 children, this is what I'm going to do, and they don't like it, yes, it's hard. But if you don't tell them, whether you write a will or not, at the point that you die, those kids have then got to deal with it. And if they don't talk to each other to start with, and they're grieving mum, and they're all doing, mum would want to be buried, no, mum would want to go in a Land Rover, no, mum would want this, that feud is going to carry on for generations. If you talk to them about it, they might not like you, but at least it's not about each other. And so that's one of the reasons people just don't want to face the difficult conversations. But it's always much better to have the difficult conversation whilst the person in charge is there, I think. And the other reason people don't like a will is they don't really think that they've got anything. They don't think they've got any assets. They think that you need to have something to leave. Oh, my property's only rented, so it doesn't matter. It's like, no, but everything you've got, somebody has got to deal with, even if it is just some shares from when Woolwich became Barclays, or your pension that you might get because you worked as a cleaner in the council for years, or that amount of money in your bank account, or those things that you've inherited from your parents and grandparents. It doesn't matter what it is. Somebody's got to do something with it. And everybody that thinks, oh, it's just easier if I leave it, it isn't, because somebody's then got to go, right, well, now I've got to try and get a grant. Now I've got to try and work out what I'm going to do. It leaves a mess. But it's easier to leave a mess than to deal with a mess. I think that's why people don't do the will, because you have to kind of go, right, how am I going to deal with that mess? And the first thing that you do is you come in to see us and you tell me what the mess is, and you talk about it, and in talking about it, you find 3 or 4 solutions immediately. And then we write to you and go, these are what things you've thought about. And then you've got it written down, and it's suddenly out of your head, and it seems like much less of a mess. And then that's just a job done that's no longer in your head at 3 in the morning.
And I think the other thing I learnt when one of my parents died was that afterwards, if there was something that you felt maybe they had always wanted to do, but it wasn't in the will, there is this deed of variation, isn't there?
Yeah, so you can do a deed of variation within 2 years of when someone's died, and it's effective for tax purposes, and it is, I mean, really, it's you giving something to someone else, but it is, for tax purposes, it's varying the will, and emotionally it feels like it's putting it back to the way that mum would have wanted it. You know, it's technically you saying, instead of me getting my third, I'm going to share my third between me and my children, because she intended to give them something, but they were accidentally excluded for some reason. And it emotionally feels like you're setting right what your mum would have wanted.
Yeah. And it is a good feeling. And it was very straightforward to do.
It's very straightforward to do, and it does feel right. Yeah, absolutely.
I could listen to this for ages, you know. But at the bottom of it, I'm just so grateful that you and I have both written a will, and you have. Just checking. Teresa, thank you. It is a huge subject, but I think you've given us a really good feel for why it's important. And that was the key message.
Absolutely. Discussion. I think the key message is, if you discuss it, you can make it really, really personal. And if you don't discuss it, somebody else is going to make your decisions for you.
And I think by discussing it, it doesn't mean that anything's going to happen any sooner
Absolutely.
than it's planned to do. Because actually that's the big thing for people, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Teresa Blenard from Walters Barbary Solicitors. It's been a joy to chat to you, and we've all learnt an awful lot. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and took something away from it. Here at Cornwall Hospice Care, we offer a free will writing service to our patients and our supporters. So if you'd like to write or update your will, or just ask a question, please do get in touch by emailing giftsinwills@cornwallhospice.co.uk, and we can then connect you with one of our trusted local solicitors. Thank you for helping make everyday matter for our patients and their families across Cornwall. And please remember, there's plenty of information about wills and legacies on our website at www.cornwallhospicecare.co.uk. You've been listening to Two Old Choughs, A Tale of Two Hospices.